as I see it, as much as I understand it, it speaks their agenda. Regretfully, I couldn't make a film like that. I made a film in which the people agreed to speak, but for many of them, I mean, again, there is a gray area there, but for some of them, the film doesn't speak their agenda. That's a difference.
I have a lot of questions about this desk, two of them. One of them is, from the time you first decided to make the film to by the end of it, in what way did your own ideas change, or what do you feel you most kind of learned or were surprised by in the film? The other is, you said a little more about the reaction in Israel to your film.
Okay. So this is a very, documentaries are, there are various kinds of documentaries. There's the kind of documentary that you follow something and you don't know how it will evolve. This is not really this kind of film. This is a film that's very static. It's basically shot in 2 shots, and I studied the subject for a couple of years before I did the interview, so there was not a lot that could surprise me on the fact level. I also studied, this refers to the reason why they continue to talk. I studied their work, and I could speak to them in detail about it, and that made them have to answer in detail and not just speak generally about political views. But coming back to this, on the fact level, there was hardly anything that surprised me, but the two main, I can speak about 2 issues, in which one which was a surprise and the other was a kind of change of understanding something in a deeper way. I think that when I prepared and I was reading their work and reading the work of defense lawyers and learning, things were much more clear to me than when I finally sat down and started to speak with these people, because I felt before I really knew what I think about the cases, and sitting in front of them, I felt the mirror that they were putting in front of me in a much more complicated way. I didn't think so much about what comes out of the film and the layer of what happens to you when and this happens to many of us, when you function in a certain system, and the system has its direction, where it's going, and you are in it, and you decide you're not going to leave it. And then you have to start to rationalize. And this applies to school teachers, to doctors, to filmmakers, to many professions. And then seeing them rationalize and being with them in the process of rationalizing things, that this was the big surprise, or this was where I was feeling something new. It wasn't something that I knew would happen in this film. A certain issue which I feel is an important issue, in the film I think again, one of the limitations of documentaries is that everything is very concise, and everything is, and depth of the research of this kind of film can't come in. You can't represent things necessarily in the depth that you want. So an issue that I found very important for me is the issue with the High Court of Justice and its involvement. And there I went through some kind of a process, because before I started working on the subject, I belonged to a part of the Israeli society in which the High Court of Justice is really like the last resort, in a way. We don't have a constitution. We have a political system that is generation after generation somehow less trustable and less serious, and it seems also more corrupted, and also a society that's moving not in the democratic direction, but the other direction. So the High Court of Justice is really, we put our trust in it. And I live in Jerusalem, and it's a graffiti that you can see on the wall, which the right wing created. The High Court of Justice is good for the Arabs. And I think that before I really said, yeah, they sprayed that because this is really the one institution that protects the minority. And it does, but starting to study it and study the rulings in the cases, I was shocked to see that actually when you count, you really have a handful of decisions in which the High Court of Justice really went against the policy of the state or against the army and said, this is just plain illegal. There was intervention in I mean, from the handful of cases in the film, there are two. The private land, which wasn't upheld over the years, but this is what the High Court said, and torture, which has made a great difference. But when you look at all the other matters, and there are matters that are touching the film, for instance, deportation and palliative house demolition, both of which are contradictory to international law, at least as most of the world sees it, and also punitive house demolitions are contradicting the way our legal system works. You can't punish a family for someone's crime. And the High Court of Justice failed. One bar, by the way, speaks about it today with a certain remorse, but the High Court of Justice failed through all the periods to strike these policies down. And the army finally stopped using them for their own reasons. They felt that it wasn't effective. The geopolitical changes have made deportations not effective. But the High Court of Justice never really struck that down. But then when you continue studying, you realize that there is like this unpublished history of the High Court of Justice effect on the occupation, and that is everything that the High Court of Justice didn't write. There were thousands of petitions in which the army is going to do something to a Palestinian family, resident, prisoner, or whatever. The person petitions to the High Court against land confiscation, against deportation, against house demolition, against me. And the court reads the petition and signals to the army, you might not want a decision on this, because this has foundation. So what can you do about it? And then a kind of deal is struck in which the army says, okay, we don't need to do all that. We can do something less. We don't have to deport the person. We can put him in administrative detention. We don't have to take the whole land. We'll take only some or not. We don't have to destroy the house. We can just seal off the room where that person lived or part of the house. And in return for that, the petitioner withdraws the petition. And so all three sides gain something, because the High Court is saved from writing another decision either with the occupation, which most of the judges don't like to do, or against the occupation, which is pretty impossible to do, and this is what gets the court into trouble with the political system. The political system is trying to diminish the power of the court constantly. The petitioner, anyway, didn't petition to the High Court of Justice of Israel because he believes in Israeli justice or in the Israeli system. It was just a tool to gain something, and if he can save some of his interest, then that would be good. And the army doesn't really care about this specific decision, but the precedent, the bad precedent, would be more worrying. So when you look at it from the point of view, some of you are lawyers. I'm sure that it's High Court of Justice is not supposed to moderate deals. It's supposed to say if something is legal or illegal. But if you look at it from a practical point of view of how the occupation developed, there were forces in Israel that really wanted to go much further all the time, and still want to go. And this pressure of the court sort of pushes back on that all the time, and does regulate, not in a formal way, but it does make it harder for the occupation. So for instance, I said before that the High Court of Justice did not strike down primitive house demolition. But until the mid-80s, the way it would work, and this is hundreds of cases, let's say a Molotov cocktail would be thrown and cause an injury. I don't think there was a case of fatality, but cause damage to Israeli lives or to Palestinian collaborator lives. Then this was the case for house demolition. And until the mid-80s, practice was the general security got intelligence, got information that they were fine with, and they thought that it's sufficient, that this is the person who did it. They would come, demolish the house, no questions asked, immediately. Then the person would also be, the person would be arrested, and there would be a trial. Perhaps the house demolition would take place only after his confession, but that's the way it was in the beginning. In the mid-80s, the High Court of Justice started moving into the subject. It refused to rule on it, but it said this is such a dramatic, irreversible measure that you have to give people, the army has to give people a chance for a hearing. So the people who got a demolition order, your house is going to be demolished in 72 hours, would go to a military commission and say, we don't agree to this, you don't have a reason to do this. And the military commission would have to review it. It would take a bit of time. And then if the military commission decision was to demolish the house, they would go to the High Court of Justice, which supervises the military commission. So, and these processes got more and more lengthy, and finally, to a certain point, it reached that there was a year and a half of legal proceedings before the house would actually be demolished, and by that time, no one even remembered why the house was being demolished. And these are years that the media became more and more active, the world media and Israeli media, and these were just bad images. So the army began to get tired of the practice, a lot because of the friction that the legal system put on it without ruling. So this is the kind of thing that it's a dichotomy that is, there's no bottom line. Why did we do it like this? Why did we both have this occupation that's moving forward and forward, and also put in a mechanism that slows it down and actually doesn't let it be free? But this is something I learned.
The second part of the question about the Israeli reaction.
Reactions. The gatekeepers changed. The gatekeepers sort of created a public discussion, which sort of finished the public discussion that was around this film. This film came out about a year and a half before that, and the reaction was very strong. I was afraid that it was a film that was going to disappear because it's about this specific dry issue and who's going to be able to debate it. But it had hundreds of screenings, and the reactions were polarized, but strong. And I think it was. There were a few reasons for it. When I say that the reactions are strong, for me the most moving reactions are reactions from the public, of course, but also from the people who, not necessarily from the legal system,